British Gas. Wartime HQ. Address: De Montfort Street, Leicester. OS grid reference SK583044. Now completely demolished, the former administrative office basement provided the British Gas County War bunker. Gas is distributed around the country from terminals in Scotland and along the east coast through a national transmission system (NTS). Leicestershire is strategically important to this process as the control centre for the NTS has been in Hinckley since the 1960s. The gas supply to consumers, 75% of the population in Leicestershire was dependent on gas, was controlled via telemetry link from De Montfort Street to the Hinckley NTS control centre. However, the system was quite vulnerable as loss of supply from the North Sea, almost certain after a nuclear exchange, would mean shutdown of the NTS. Underground gas pipelines could have remained intact outside of blast areas, but control installations are at ground level and open to blast, electromagnetic pulse and the loss of electricity supply. Indeed, as Jeff Evans, communications advisor for Transco, admits, there is no underground bunker or hardened control centre at Hinckley. During peacetime the installation is quite secure with good security, but the installation is open and at surface level. I am unable to go into detail on any war preparations save to say that there will be a dispersal of management and resources as widely as possible around the country. In a build-up to war, the need for consumers to shut off the supply is self-evident and the public would be advised to do this. Post-attack authority over supply would come from nominated British gas managers located at the regional and sub-regional government HQs, Nottingham or Scendilby and Loughborough of course. Some limited supplies of gas were held in tanks, but these again are at ground level and thus most likely would have been destroyed. It was also anticipated that there would have been a strong possibility of a total curtailment of the gas rigs. The only hope for a limited resumption of supply would be to bypass gas terminals, but this relied on the survival of some rigs and enough underground piping remaining intact. The only hope for a limited resumption of supply would be to bypass gas terminals, but this relied on the survival of some rigs and enough underground piping remaining intact. East Midlands Electricity. Wartime HQ. Address: Coppice Road, Arnold, Nottinghamshire. OS grid reference SK589459. The East Midlands Electricity Board (EMEB) Wartime HQ, which covered Leicestershire, was in the basement of the offices in Arnold over the border in Nottinghamshire. The site is now being redeveloped for housing and the offices have been demolished. Generation of electricity was the responsibility of the Central Electricity Generating Board and distributed by the EMEB. As the main distribution method is overhead lines, it leaves the network completely vulnerable to blast and electromagnetic pulse. Under post-attack conditions, management of remaining supplies and resources would come from county controllers under the direction of senior nominated EMEB managers based at the Nottingham or Scendilby and Loughborough regional war HQs, whichever was active. Supplies would be restricted to supporting defence, emergency services, healthcare, transport, communications and feeding centre functions. In effect, no mains electricity would be available to the general public. Some rerouting of supply was possible around damaged substations, but this required extensive manual switching, almost impossible until radiation levels had dropped back down to acceptable levels. The key location as far as power distribution in Leicester is concerned is the Enderby substation. In support of the national grid, hospitals, 75% of their requirement, and industrial complexes, 18% of their requirement, had standby generators. The mod also held stocks of emergency power generators. Address: Anstey Lane, Leicester. OS grid reference SK575059. The semi-sunken maned bunker at Leicester is located behind an office block at their Anstey Lane facility. Construction started in 1990 and the bunker is now used as a document store. The mound is grass-covered with a small brick block house on one side with a wooden door that gives access to a flight of 8 stairs. At the bottom of the stairs is a heavy steel and concrete blast door to the right into an airlock. Beyond this first blast door there is another blast door on the left into the standby generator room. There are 2 Dorman, broad-crown generators, 415 volts 3-phase 27 kVA, a 260-gallon fuel tank and ventilation trunking. The second airlock blast door opens into a decontamination room with 3 steps up to a shower cubicle. At the back of the decontamination room is another blast door into a large reception room. To the left are the unisex toilets containing 2 WC cubicles, 2 wash basins, a urinal and a floor-standing water tank. The next room on the left is now empty but was the kitchen. It still retains its wooden units, sink and draining board. The generator control room with a large floor-standing cabinet is accessed through the kitchen, and at the back of this room, in another room, are 2 large water tanks. On the left-hand side of the reception room are 2 empty rooms, one accessed through the other, one of which is painted pink. It is assumed that these are the 2 dormitories, the pink one being female. One of the rooms has an emergency exit consisting of a small blast door in the wall. Behind the blast door is an 8-foot vertical shaft with a ladder and a manhole cover in the grass mound above. 2 further rooms are accessed from the far side of the reception room. They also have interconnecting doors and a door into the dormitory. Again, there is no confirmation of their intended use, but the first one appears to be the control room with a wallboard relating to the contents of filing cabinets. The second room appears to have been communications, and still has 2 wallboards and a coaxial cable. On the right-hand side of the reception room is the ventilation plant room with a large 2-man handle for manual operation in the event of a power failure. A blast door at the back of the room leads through to the air intake room where the filters have never been installed. This is post-attack. As with gas and electricity, distribution of remaining water resources would be managed by the county controller under the direction of the nominated 7 Trent water manager at the regional and sub-regional war HQs, whichever active. Actual distribution to survivors would involve the assistance of the fire service. In a build-up to war, householders would have been advised to stockpile a minimum daily ration of 1 litre per person per day to survive for at least 14 days, and as much again for washing purposes. The main source of water for Leicestershire comes from reservoirs at Lady Bower and Melbourne in Derbyshire and Cropston, Swithland, Blackbrick and Manpanton in the Charnwood area of the county. The majority of distribution is by gravity and requires minimal electricity. However, a proportion, mainly the Charnwood stocks, requires pumping. It has to be remembered that water towers, surface reservoirs and pumping stations are all at ground level and thus completely vulnerable to the effects of blast and radiation. Burst main repairs would be impossible until at least 14 days after the attack. The county war plan prescribes the filling of public swimming pools and beer kegs to stockpile. It was to be assumed that when possible all supplies to houses would be cut off from the mains, reduced to a skeleton network, and all supplies given by standpipe or taps fixed to mains. Sewage works would have ceased to operate and remaining manpower resources directed towards re-establishing some kind of county-wide network. Only under exceptional circumstances would county controllers authorize tankering of water supplies to areas of need, and tankers for breweries and dairies would be requisitioned for this. A major problem would be contamination of supply by gamma radiation and bacteria. Lack of power would effectively rule out boiling before consumption, therefore the Home Office advised filtration kits were to be used by the public. Hall, Ashby de la Zouch, Leicestershire. OS grid reference SK392173. Now currently under development by J.S. Bloor Homes, Calorton Hall was not only the NCB South Midlands area office, but with an elaborate basement it also acted as the NCB County War bunker. During peacetime the basement was simply used for filing and storage, but it did have a safe which contained the local Coalboard War Plans folder. Each Coalboard area office was required to prepare and maintain war plans. The maintenance of the Leicestershire war plans fell under the jurisdiction of Mr. Jeff Clamp, who, in keeping with the tacked on importance given to civil defence planning, had a wider role as head of general services. As if to underline the low level of importance given, it's interesting to note that during the 1970s there was a dedicated civil defence planner at Calorton Hall, but when questions were asked of his worth his post was removed and the role added to general administration. Mr. Clamp spoke of his wartime preparations. "I remember going to County Hall to participate in civil defence planning seminars and was quite overawed with the number of people attending in official suits such as senior police officers. I had done some pre-preparation to talk about the Coalboard role by visiting the local mines rescue station on Tamworth Road in Ashby de la Zouch. It was agreed I could put the local service at the disposal of defence planners should a war situation arise. But that didn't amount to much. I spoke to Brigadesman Mark Whittaker of the Mines Rescue, who told me the entire complement at Tamworth Road amounted to 2 vehicles, a Carmichael heavy goods and a transit van, and some hand tools for earth moving." With reference to coal, the Leicestershire Civil Defence Plan states, "Some pits might be destroyed and many are mobilised through lack of power. Pits left unworked and without adequate maintenance would soon deteriorate to a point where working faces collapsed. Pit-head stocks, lowest at the end of a severe winter, together with other stocks held by the trade or consumers, might meet local priority needs for several weeks, although most of the coal would be power station grades which cannot readily be used elsewhere. Open cast sites would be less vulnerable to the direct effects of the attack. Nevertheless, shortages of fuel, even after fallout conditions permitted outside working, could restrict or halt production, and shortages of transport would probably inhibit the movement of surviving stocks. Nuclear strike control over oil stocks would rest with the sub-regional or regional seat of government, whichever active. Nominated officers from the above-mentioned locations would have positioned themselves at both regional bunkers, and would give advice to the regional commissioners. In the build-up to war, oil stocks would be maximized and dispersed to less vulnerable locations such as the storage tanks of defense and essential services installations. Some petrol stations would be filled and sealed, and the remainder would give priority to essential service vehicles with the aid of the police. However, after nuclear exchange, damage to filling station equipment at ground level and loss of electricity supply would make recovery of stocks difficult. Loss of mainland storage terminals would mean an almost total loss of North Sea oil. As oil refineries are at surface level and exposed, they are likely to suffer severe damage. The central location of Leicestershire would present problems in replenishing exhausted supplies from the North Sea, even if North Sea stocks and extraction equipment survived due to a lack of transportation vehicles and clear roads. The relevant regional commissioner would authorise use of stocks, and it would then be a matter for county controllers on how they were best used.